It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here together with you. And nice to see some familiar faces in the audience here. And first of all, I just want to thank Mizrachi UK, and I want to thank the Silvermans for inviting me. And it's just great to be with you. I think earlier this year I was actually meant to spend the Shabbat in Manchester as part of the celebrations of Yom Yerushalayim. And unfortunately, for obvious reasons, we're not traveling at the moment. All I can say is I hope that Be'ezrat Hashem, who knows, even maybe this year for Yom Yerushalayim, if we, what do they call it? If we have the vaccine permitting, who knows, maybe we'll be able to make it over. We'll see how things develop in the upcoming weeks and months. I'm going to share my screen with you. I'm going to share a source sheet. You know what I'll do? Even before that, I'll put the source sheet in the chat so that if anybody wants to actually download it onto their computer, they're really welcome to. And it might help people to follow however you'd like to do it. And then we'll dive into our topic today. I'm sharing a PDF. Let's just make sure. Yes, it went through. So anybody's welcome to pick that up, but I'm also going to share the exact same document on the screen. So that should make it easy for everybody. And I've called this shir Complacency and Renewal, a shir for Chanukah. And I hope that what we're going to be able to do today is look at maybe what is a interesting theme, and I think is one that really it's worthwhile discussing together. I'm going to start off with last week's Parshat Shavua and a sort of, how should I say it, a disturbing Rashi, a disturbing comment by Rashi, which has always haunted me on a personal religious level. And let's just take a look at how to, at our first source. Vayeshiv Yaakov be'eretz Megurei Aviv be'eretz Canaan. This is last week's parsha, what we read on Shabbos. Yaakov lived in the land of his father's sojourning in the land of Canaan, and then suddenly we have a new introduction after that. Eile Toldot Yaakov. These are the progeny of Yaakov, Toldot from the word Leida, from the word, children. Yosef ben Shavai Shana, etc., etc. Rashi explains it in a certain way, and then in the middle, Rashi gives a whole other set of explanations according to the tradition of Rav Moshe Hadarshan. And here, let's take a look at the Rashi. V'od nidrash bo. This is source number 2 we're looking at. Hope you can see that I have it in Hebrew and in English. V'od nidrash bo. Vayeshev. What are we learning here? Vayeshev. Bikesh Yaakov leishev b'shalva. Yaakov sought to live in a state of calm, in a state of peace. Kafatz alav rogzo shel Yosef. Suddenly, the anger, the trauma, I guess we'd say, the trauma of Yosef pounced upon him. In other words, the moment Vayeshev Yaakov, Ele Torot Yaakov Yosef, and now he adds a comment. Tzadikim mevakshim leishiv b'shalva. Tzadik anticipates to live in a state of calm and tranquility. Amar HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God says, Lo dayan letzadikim asher mutukan lahem leolam haba. Isn't it enough that tzadikim will get a good portion in olam haba? Ela shemevakshim leishiv b'shalva ba'olam hazeh. What, you really want both worlds? In olam haba, you're going to have a great sense of calm and benefit. Why are you looking for it in this world? This is really a little bizarre, I have to say. And when I've read this Rashi, I've always been very happy that they say that I'm not a tzaddik, because maybe I can live b'shalva, right? In other words, I think a lot of us would like to live b'shalva. It's even a bracha we talk about, shalom b'chelech, shalva ba'amonotayich. But here, what's happening here? The Midrash, which Rashi is quoting, says, V'od nidrash bo, says that the problem with Yaakov, why did the Yosef thing happen to him? Because Bikesh Yaakov leishev b'shalva, and suddenly along comes Yosef. Now, I need to explain a little bit where this is coming from. And I'm going to explain, first of all, what I think is the pshat, and then we'll try and get a little deeper into the drush. But first, let's pay attention back to source number 1 at 2 interesting words. Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz megurei aviv be'eretz Canaan. There's a difference between lashevet and lagur. Lagur, you see it even in English here. Jacob was settled in the land where his father sojourned. Lagur is from the word ger. It means to be a stranger. You're constantly wandering around. You are an alien. You don't have residence rights. You are a foreigner. And by nature of a foreigner, you are always adapting. You're always in flux. You are always moving. And what does it now say? The first pasuk of is Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz megurei aviv. His father had sojourned, right? Not only his father, Yitzchak, Avram too. Remember, Ger v'toshav anochi imachem. With the at Brit Milah in Bereshit Perek Yud Zayin, Hashem says to Avraham, Natati lecha et eretz megurecha, the land of your sojourning. Avram, of course, is always moving. He comes to the land. He's in Shechem. He's in Beit El. He goes down to Egypt, back to Beit El, to Hebron, to Beersheba, back to Hebron. Avram is always transient, itinerant. Likewise, Yitzchak is described here as Megurei. And Yaakov's also had a pretty turbulent life. Of course, what's happened with Yaakov? He grew up in his parents' house. He went to Lavan. He's come back from Lavan, had to contend with Esav, went to Shechem. His daughter is raped in Shechem. Eventually makes his way south, Beit El, to his father's home in Hebron, and now maybe Yaakov hopes, Vayeshev, I can now settle. The Midrash is saying that why do we need this opening pasuk? Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz megurei aviv be'eretz Canaan. Usually parashiot start Eile Toldot, right? Eile Toldot Noach, Eile Toldot Yitzchak ben Avraham, Avraham holidit Yitzchak. What's this opening line? There's nothing wrong with translating it, but the Midrash says there's a causal relationship between Pasuk Aleph and Pasuk Bet. Why is Eile Toldot Yaakov suddenly Yosef ben 17 Shana? We go into the whole Yosef saga with all the pain and trauma and torment and bitterness of the Yosef saga? Because Yaakov, you really think it's time to let everything just rest? No. Tzadikim mevakshim leishei b'shalva, lo dayin l'tzadikim al shemekutukam le'en l'olam haba. And this is a pretty frightening philosophy, because I think that we all would like to have, how should I say it, a calm life, a tranquil life. We don't want to be living in a state of constant turbulence. What exactly is going on here? By the way, Yaakov, if you look at source number 4, Yaakov really does have a very difficult life. You know, when we talk about the various different, when you talk about the various different avot, they talk about Avram, of course, Tikein Shachrit. Avram is the rising sun. Yitzchak is Mincha. Yaakov is Mariv. Yaakov is always in the dark times. Yaakov is the Av of the Galut. Yitzchak never left the land. Yaakov goes into Galus. If you look in source number 4, Vayomer Paro el Yaakov, Kama Yemei Shnei Chayecha. When Paro turned around to Yaakov and said, how old are you? Vayomer Yaakov el Paro, Yemei Shnei Megurai, Shloshim u'me'at shana, ma'at v'ra'im ayu shnei chayai, v'lo esiget Yemei Shnei Chayai avotai b'mei Megureihem. Yaakov says, right? First of all, what does he say? Yemei Shnei Megurai. The years of my sojourn on earth are 130 years. In other words, I was never given that rest. That rest which I anticipated, that sense of Vayeshev, I never achieved it. I never got Vayeshev, and my life has been short and bitter and hard, right? What a way to look back at your life. Yaakov really, his own self-perception was that his life had been a difficult one and a hard one. But I'd like to go back again to, I said I'd take a look at the the pshat of this pasuk, I'd just like to say something about this pasuk as well. Is the drush here, is the drush that Rashi brought in source number 2, is it reading the opening pasukim Vayeshev well? And I'd like to suggest that it is, and in a particular way. Here we have Bereshit Perek Lamed Zayin, right? Chapter 37. But this Perek immediately before, Bereshit Perek Lamed Vav, is a very interesting Perek. It's a very difficult Perek because it deals with Esav and all of the Alufei Esav. The end of Parshat Vayishlach, Alufei Esav. It's a Perek with 30, 40 psukim filled with all the kings and army, and we wonder why do we need to hear all about Esav. Let's take a look at the more or less the beginning of this Perek and see what happens. Vayikach Esav et nashav et banav et benotav et kol nefshot beito et mikneu et kol behemto. Esav takes his wives, his sons, his daughters, all of his family, and his flocks and all his cattle, that kol kinyano asher achash be'eretz Canaan, vayelech el eretz mipnei Yaakov achiv. Ki hayaruch usham rav mishevet yachdav. They couldn't live together. This sounds a bit like Lot and Avraham. V'lo yachla eretz megureihem laseit otam mipnei lehem. The land could not support all their livestock. It's interesting. We look at Esav as a hunter, but it seems like Esav was also a herdsman. And simply there were too many herds in the land. And now look, Pasuk Chet. Vayeshev Esav Bahar Seir, Esav hu Edom. Esav went to Har Seir, to the land of Har Seir, maybe in the northern Negev, or possibly Har Seir is in the Eva Hayarden, it's not clear. Esav hu Edom. Ve'ela tolot Esav avi Edom Bahar Seir. Notice the structure. Pasuk Chet. Vayeshev Esav Bahar Seir, Ela Tolot Esav. Now we go back to Yaakov. Vayeshev Yaakov Be'eretz Megurei Aviv, Ela Tolot Yaakov Yosef. I hope you notice there's an identical structure. Okay? What do we read here? Esav and Yaakov separate. The two brothers, the two twins. Esav gets his land in Eretz Edom, a very suitable land for him. The name matches Esav. And Yaakov stays in Eretz Canaan, which is where he's meant to be. What does Esav do? Pasuk Chet. Vayeshev. And then Ve'ela Toldot. What does Yaakov therefore want to do? He wants to Vayeshev. However, as we know from the Brit B'Tarim, it's not time to settle yet. There is still going to be the sojourn in Egypt. Ger yezaracha, ger, right? There's that word. Ger yezaracha be'eretz lolahim. Your children will be strangers in a land which is not theirs. Va'avadum v'inu otam arba me'ot shana. And now Hashem is indeed putting the process, Yosef ben Shavai Shana, the process of Galut is coming into fruition. And now we read it in a much Vayeshev Yaakov, Eletodot Yaakov. Yaakov wanted to be like his brother Yosef, like his brother Esav. He wanted to already reach the end of history. He already wanted to realize history in a sort of a settled way, in a way where you'd arrived at your destination, and now that's it. You sit in the armchair and you rest. And it's very clear from this story, even without the drush, that these two psukim, Vayeshev Yaakov Ele Toldot, is copying Esav, but we all know that that cannot possibly be. Why? Because there is still the Brit Tarim, Ger Yezarachav, Vayeshev Yaakov Be'eretz Megurei Aviv. If your father was a Ger, you're going to be a Ger. Your children are going to be a Ger. Jewish history is not finished yet. Jewish history has not arrived at its destination. There is still quite a lot of turbulence on the way. So, what exactly is this? Just talking about a very, very formative period of history where we were still in our infantile steps as a nation? Or is this making, as Rashi says, a deeper comment about what it means to be a tzaddik, or what it means to be a Jew? These are really, really provocative thoughts. And here I'm going to go to one of my teachers, Rav Yehuda Amital, Zichrono Levracha, who was the Rosh Yeshiva in Gush. and Yeshivat Har Etzion. And let's take a look at his article on this topic. We're not going to read through all of it. I've taken a little bit. This is about from his book, Va'aretz Natan Livnei Adam, and you can find these articles in English on the virtual Bet Midrash Har Etzion's website. And let's take a look at what he says. I'll just read a little bit together with you. Modern Western man lives his life in great tension. Under the influence of Eastern teachings, many began to advocate a life of tranquility and meditation. In other words, he's relating to, a lot of Israelis spend quite a bit of time after the army in the Far East, in India, wherever it might be, and come back with this sense that possibly, this sense of, I don't know, nirvana, the sense that you can have, just let it be. And he says, some have seen this as an ideal of human redemption, the ability to reach internal tranquility. And he doesn't say this is entirely wrong, but look what he says. I harbor fundamental reservations regarding such approaches. There are certain people who at times, indeed, he says, live their life in excessive tension, and they need help to reduce their tension levels, no doubt, right? If you've got financial distress, marital problems, go deal with it. But turning tranquility into a way of life, or maybe I might add into an ideal, is misguided on several accounts. First, he says, such an approach is liable to hamper and inhibit a person who strives for advancement and development in his life. In other words, if you just want to say, everything's fine now, hakol beseder, hakol sababa, that's it, right? Then, where are you going to try and find progress, advancement, challenge, development? There's a certain contradiction between aspiring for tranquility and positive ambition, the force that drives human beings to advance and develop. Second, he says, directing one's life towards internal tranquility involves egotism, but this is often accompanied by a disregard for the problems and needs of society. So it's very interesting what Rav Amital is saying. He said, if I just want to be in a state where I just like, everything's fine in my world, right? There are two problems. Number one, there's always more to progress. I can always be more. I can always achieve more. Second of all, he said, you might think that you're calm, but look at the world around you. There are people who have great needs. There are people, there's always somebody to do chesed for. There is always something to achieve. There are always suffering people, needy people. So who are you to be calm when there is a lot of work to be done? Rav Amital keeps going here and explains, maybe I'll just read a little more, right? He says, I especially dissociate myself from such approach when it comes to Avodat Hashem, he says. The Gemara in Kiddushin says, famous Gemara, Gadol ha-metzuva v'yosa mimi she'ena metzuva v'yosa. Great is one who's commanded and performs mitzvahs, the one who's not commanded and performs mitzvahs. In other words, right, better to be given a command and to do than to do things voluntarily. And Tosfos explains why. It says, it seems that the reason that one who is commanded and performs a mitzvah is better than one who is that he worries more and grieves more that he will violate the mitzvah than one who is not commanded. The latter, having bread in his basket for if he wishes, he can abandon the mitzvah. According to Tosfos, one who is obligated to fulfill a mitzvah is preferable because of the heightened concern about proper performance. In other words, okay, if I decide that I want to engage in a project, I can do the project or I can abandon the project. It's my choice. However, if I'm at work and my boss is telling me I need the results by Sunday morning, I've got somebody on my back. And that's why it's better to be mitzuvah b'oser, right? We need to have the tension. We need to be concerned. In other words, there is a value, if you look at the last line there, this indicates the value of religious life being accompanied by positive tension. There's negative tension. There's tension which doesn't allow us to function. Somebody who's exceedingly anxious or somebody who's got problems should go and deal with those problems. However, there's a positive tension, a tension which makes us realize that there is more to achieve in Talmud Torah, there is more to achieve in Avodat Hashem, there is more to achieve in Tikkun Olam, there is more to achieve in Chesed. That we have to have. There's no room for complacency, says Rav Amital, right? And Ashrei Adam Mefached Tamid refers to Torah study. Again, what does he talk about? He says we should always be worried that our learning is, I don't know enough. Maybe I don't know that halacha well enough. Maybe I could be more a makpid about this, that, and the other. I remember many years ago reading an article in a book about what they called, not yet Judaism. It was a very beautiful article because it spoke about the idea that for every single person, the question is, are you religious enough? And he always said the answer will always be not yet. Let's say, for example, he said, somebody says, do you do enough, do you daven enough, right? So one will say, well, I only go to shul on Shabbos. Other person will say, well, you know what? I daven 3 times a day all week, but I'm not yet ready to make it to minyan. Another guy makes it to minyan 3 times a day, but he says, you know what? I could really daven. I'm not yet ready to daven with real kavanah. Another person davens with real kavanah, but he's not yet ready to maybe sit for a few minutes before davening to really direct his thoughts. You could say in chesed, right? In chesed, one person doesn't do any chesed. Another person manages to give some tzedakah. Another person, and that person's not yet ready to give 10%. Another person gives 10% of their money to tzedakah, but they're not yet ready to, I don't know, to do bikur cholim or to really put themselves out in order to find people employment or what have you. Always a sense of something that we can do, which we can do more. Why would we ever rest on our laurels and feel that we are, we've achieved it all? And this brings me to Chanukah, because I think there is something peculiar about Chanukah, and in a minute I will try and explain, which tries to encourage this sense of what Rav Amital calls positive tension. And let me try and explain. I'm going to start off with, maybe I'll deal with two motifs here. The first is, of course, the famous Gemara, which talks about when you're meant to light your Chanukah candles. And it says, source number 6, mitzvata mishetishka achama ad shetichle regel min hashuk. The mitzvah is from when the sun goes down until, literally, tichle regel, till the foot leaves the shuk, right? In other words, it should be while people are still walking through the streets, something very, very well known. And the Gemara, of course, discusses what this means and all of this. Now, let me just maybe say something. The Balei HaChasidut, the Hasidic Rebbes, usually what they used to do was they always used to say their Torahs on the Parsha. They used to have a Tish on Shabbos, a Tish on Chag, and they used to usually delve into the Parsha and the Midrashim and the Zohar, and that was where they would draw their inspiration for much of their Torahs. But when it comes to something like Chanukah, a mitzvah midrabanan, there is no Parsha. There is Kriyas Torah, but the Nesiim, how much are we going to get from Korbanot Karat Kesef Echad? So what did they do? They darshan the Gemara. And we find some very beautiful drashot, right? Here I'm bringing you the Sfat Emet. Where is it? I was just learning the Kedushas Levi before. I don't know where I put it. It's right here. Okay, the Kedushas Levi, right? In other words, there's lots of Balei HaDrash on this. And let's take a look at the Sfat Emet, source number 7, and then we'll go back to the rest of the Gemara. And let's take a look at this. As you can see here, this is from Taf Reish Lamed Aleph, 1871, the Sfat Emet, the Gera Rebbe. And of course, it's divided up into different nights. Every night he has a different drash. And he says like this, Amar Aviza Keni Mori Rabbi, etc., etc. Haragil Bener Lahavi Hahe'ara V'Itchashut El Haragel. What's the idea of Haragil, the person who is used to a ner? You have to bring light and renewal into the hergel, into the routine. V'chein pirush shetichle regel. It's actually a beautiful, beautiful drash. Ad shetichle regel, we usually translate it until the foot leaves the shuk. But he says, what is it? It should be until tichle hahergel, until you stop treating life in a routine manner. You can't allow yourself to just get into a sort of laissez-faire routine where you don't think about your life. Now is the time to relight, to renew the hergel, right? And he says, you have to remove the sense of routine, of normality, and the sense that everything is just natural. That's the same thing. I need a light to light up my regel, right? My words are a light to light up my, not regel, but hergel. We get into patterns of activity. We sort of, we mumble through our davening. Sometimes what we need to do is we need to focus on a line of davening or learn a new bit of davening, and then suddenly, wow, our davening gets a new turbo boost, right? So likewise, in every area, sometimes a relationship, a marital relationship, sometimes a area of avodat Hashem just becomes mitzvat anashim melumada, routine, and therefore it becomes stale and so he says, What's Chanukah? Chanukah is renewal, right? Renewal. It's the renewal. They were under the control of Greece in a state of exile. And all of the four kingdoms, right, whether it is Bavel or Yavan or Edom or whichever, Paras, Hein Beteva v'Gashmiut. What does he mean? They're all huge empires which have their own order. They have their sense of routine. They have their sense of seder. Right? Underneath the sun, in the world of the normal, there is nothing new. But in the world of a miracle is to inject something, some new spiritual quality, mimela, and once you do that, by the way, it's an interesting question as well about the word chinuch, right? Education, right? We say education, I will educate my kid, and then he will be so. But one could well argue that education is not something which happens once, and then I'm educated. I need to constantly, especially in today's world where we're living in the information age, constantly be renewing, constantly be refreshing, right? And this is the Hitchut. I'll just read one more example, right, from a different year. The next year, the Sfat Emet says the same idea. He says, Shetich larem ganashuk dechalya raglet the Talmudai, shakol levatel haragilut vahateva al yedei harat nirot Chanukah. The whole idea is to levatel, right, to annul, to smash the regular and the teva and the normal through the lighting of the Chanukah candles. I'll say something else, which is if I go back to source number 6, the Gemara which we have here, right? What do we have here? We have the idea of course, that mitzvat Chanukah, and I'm sure, looking at the audience, I'm sure almost no one here would not be familiar with the source that you have on here, that mitzvah Chanukah is a strange mitzvah, that we don't just talk about, what you have to do, but we go into the area of mahadrin and mahadrin min mahadrin, which again is a sense of renewal. It's a sense, when you do something mahadrin, you're doing it with enthusiasm, right? So the mitzvah Chanukah, the first stage is ner yishuv beito, just one candle per house. The next level, ner lekol echad ve'echad, v'mahadrin min mahadrin. And of course, what do we have here? Beit Shammai say, the first day you light 8 and then you go down. And of course, what did Beit Hillel say? Mikan ve'elach mosif v'holech. Okay? Mosif v'holech. You're always adding and you're always renewing, right? Why? Ma'alim b'kodesh ve'im moridim. And I think this really goes into the whole energy of Chanukah. That Chanukah is about the idea of not living in a sense of routine, not allowing oneself to be lulled into a full sense of everything remaining as it is. And just, I'd like to go even deeper, if you want, and say that I think that this is something which is happening at an even deeper level at this time of year. And here I'd like to share a very famous Gemara when it comes to Chanukah from Masechet Avodah Zarah, But what I want to say from this Gemara is well, let's read it first. Gemara Avodah Zarah, very famous. Tanu Rabbanan. Why do we have Chanukah? In fact, by the way, I will say this Gemara in Avodah Zarah is talking about actually the festivals of the Christians or of the non-Jews, and it actually talks about a certain Chag called calendar. In fact, it's called calendar. That's what the Gemara says, and it's actually was a festival which was celebrated by the Romans of the god Janus, and Janus was a god with two heads. One looked back and one looked forward, right? One looked back and one looked forward. And that in itself is very, very interesting. Let's take a look. Tanu Rabbanan, and within this discussion, this is what it says. Tanu Rabbanan, Afishara Adam Rishon. That how did Chanukah begin, if you want? Adam Rishon saw the Yom Shemitma'et v'holech. Adam Rishon, what do we say? Hayom Harat Olam, Rosh Hashanah. Adam Rishon is created, right? So he's created at the beginning of the when the summer ends, right? Tishrei, right? Beginning of the autumn, and of course, from then, when the moment he's born, right? Shabbos is coming in every week, earlier and earlier and earlier in our terms, right? The days are getting shorter and shorter and shorter. Right? And by the time he reaches this time of year, he's going to work and it's dark, and he's coming back from work and it's dark. Amar oili shema bishvil shesarachti olam chashuch ba'adi. You know what? I sinned. And you know what's happening? Because I sinned, the world is getting darker and darker and darker. He thought it's about him. Eventually, the world is going to close in on me. Gewalt, he says, this is the death that Hashem said, that the day that you eat from the tree, you're going to die. This is my death. I'm getting a slow death, literally. The world's closing in on me. I'm slowly going into the darkness of the grave or something like that. He sat for 8 days in a state of fasting to pray for God. Okay, and suddenly what happens? At that point, during those 8 days was the winter solstice, and the days start getting longer. Kevan Shira'at Kufat Tevet, he saw Tevet coming in. V'ra'a Yom Shemarich v'holech. Suddenly he sees the days getting longer again. Shabbos is going out later. Amar, he said, "Oh, it's not about me. Minago shel olamu. It is just the way of the world. Halach v'asa shmonet yamim tovim." And then he made 8 days of celebration. L'shana acheret asa'an le'elu u'le'elu yamim tovim. He actually made both of them. I don't know, maybe Chanukah should be 16 days, 8 days of fasting and 8 days of celebration. We just keep the 8 days of celebration, right? Hu kavam l'shem shamayim. And here's, they say something very interesting. He set it l'shem shamayim, v'hin kavum l'shem avodat kochavim. In other words, what's the Gemara recognizing? I'd like to, first of all, it's fascinating, right? You're living in England and you're surrounded at this time of year by, Christmas lights and Diwali and whatever it might be. And it is fascinating that what the Gemara is telling us is that there is something universal at this time, right? That when you're in a very dark place, you want to have a festival of lights in the winter, right? I remember once I went to, for a Shabbos, I was a Shabbos in Sweden, and I was walking around the streets of Shabbos came in. I was there in November, and Shabbos came in literally 2:30. The good side of it, by the way, was that you couldn't daven Shacharis, I think, before about 10 o'clock in the morning, right? So Shabbos morning Shacharis was 10. We davened, we had a Kiddush, and then we davened Mincha, and there was about 3 more hours of Shabbos. It was quite crazy. But whichever way, so what was I going to say about Sweden? On every high street, there are, at the entrance of every shops, there are like candles, there are flames, there are torches, because I guess there's a tendency when the world is so dark to want to light the world up, to have a festival of lights. And therefore, it shouldn't surprise us that there are Christmas lights and Diwali lights and whatever. Of course, this is lahavdil, right? But what I want to say is actually it's something very human. We're talking about Adam Arishon. We're talking about universal man, right? Universal man feels the sense that the world is closing in, and it's frightening. And I need to make, so to speak, to make light. Now, what does the Gemara say though? Hein kavum l'shem avodat kochamim, but he was kovea them l'shem shamayim. In other words, this is the time when it is so easy in life to hit the doldrums. The days are getting dark, right? We're in Corona, right? It's a very, very difficult time, right? We feel very, very stuck. And what is Chanukah about? It's literally about that, not only doing mitzvahs, but doing the mahadrin. It's about Mosif v'holech. It's about Malim v'kodesh be'emo reading. It's about Chanukah. And Chanukah, again, doesn't mean dedication. It means almost like rededication, like chinuch, like constantly being aware that one has to rekindle the flame, right? To rekindle the flame. Maybe here I will share, again, a piece of Torah that I heard many years ago by a scholar that you might have come across in England, because he was there for a year of shlichut on behalf of Mizrachi, Rav Binyamin Tavori, Zichrono Livracha. And Rav Tavori once told me a beautiful Dvar Torah about the parsha that we're going to read, literally the last 3 lines on the last day of Chanukah. B'haloscha, right? We finish the Chanukah Nesi'im, and then we read B'halotcha Nirot, a very famous Rashi, right? And Rashi says that when Aaron HaKohen saw all of the Nesi'im, the Nasi of Yehuda, and the Nasi of Reuven, the Nasi of whichever one, bringing gifts, Chalshal Dato, he felt upset, right? How is it they get all to dedicate the Mishkan, and I don't get to dedicate the Mishkan, right? What did Hashem say? You remember the Rashi at the beginning of Ba'aloscha? Hashem says, don't worry, your portion is bigger than theirs. You will be Madliku Meitivit Hanirot. You are going to always light, and by the way, the critical thing is, Meitiv, clean out the candles. You're the one who's always going to clean them out. The Ramban says, well, what's the big chiddush here? I don't understand. Everybody else gets to have their picture on the front page of the paper. All the politicians get to bring a beautiful gift. What do you say to Aaron? You're going to clean everything out. It's going to get your hands greasy and you're going to light the candles. What's the big chiddush? And the Ramban says that this is a remez to the Chashmonaim. The question is, of course, why are the Chashmonaim better than the Nesiim? The Nesiim dedicated the Mishkan. The Chashmonaim also dedicated the Mishkan. Why is it better? And the answer is really quite clear. It is a wonderful thing to dedicate a building. Sometimes you'll see a building and all the plaques on the walls of the building, but the building is in disrepair. It's one thing to build a building, to dedicate a Mishkan. But what happens when, as an institution, the institution runs into a state of disrepair? It runs into a state where it needs renewal, it needs hitchachut. Then somebody needs to come and pick it up. And it's so much more difficult when something is already in a certain pattern to now say, now I'm going to refresh it. I'm going to renew it. I'm going to give it a makeover. I'm going to find a way with all the resistance because there are already protocols in place. But I want to take this thing and I want to bring it into a new, modern, active, vibrant place. The Chashmonaim weren't there when the Beit Mikdash was originally dedicated. That's the easy thing, to take a new building, a new Beit Mikdash. But what happens when everything becomes decrepit and you suddenly have the Greeks who are weighing in and the Beit Midrash is growing weeds? Can you engage in revolution and come with a new spirit of renewal and be able to renew a life? That's the question. And that's what's at the core. The whole idea of Chanukah is it's the tipping point. It was the tipping point for Adam Arishon. It's the tipping point in nature. And our command here is to engage not just in Chanukah in the sense of dedication, but in the sense of renewal, right? The sense of renewing things. So now I want to come back to where we started. I think when we first read the first source, I think we found it maybe a little disturbing, right? Yaakov wants to just they shave. Give Yaakov a break, right? Why are you telling me, Bikesh Yaakov le shave b'shalva? Yaakov wanted a little bit of calm. Why can't he? Poor Yaakov, he's gone through so much. At some point in his life, he should be able to be calm. But as I said before, in the words of Rav Amital, there is always more work to do on ourselves spiritually. There is always more work to do on to help the world, whether it's the Jewish world, whether it's the wider world, whether it's chesed. Who are we to sit back when there is so much to do? You know, we exist in a world today where we really exist in a world of a lot of pleasure and a lot of materialism. We have more than probably we grew up with, and more than our parents' generation. We really have a tremendous amount of bounty in our world. And yet, sometimes we look and we see that one of the biggest problems in our world is boredom, right? Is boredom. We see kids addicted, and some of us, let's not talk about kids, let's give ourselves the mussar. Ourselves addicted to our phones and sometimes watching endlessly, binging on Netflix, when really, you know, what exactly does it do? And again, don't get me wrong, as Rav Amital said, we all need to relax sometimes, and nobody wants to be a stressed individual. It creates a lack of health and a lack of emotional health. So having said that, but that is not, of course, an ideal. Our ideal is to be in a state where we can find the wellspring of renewal. And we can find a way always to be able to renew ourselves. We do this in many, many different ways. We do this sometimes through Talmud Torah, through studying, through experiencing new things. But I would argue that one of the messages of Chanukah is it dafka comes here at the darkest point of the winter to tell us exactly this message. Ad shetichle regel min hashuk. Don't get into just a sense of the normal. One should always want to try and be infusing one's life with a sense of something new, a new he'ara, a new light, always be lighting that light in order to keep ourselves alive. And I think it's our mandate to try and achieve that. And I think if we do that, not only will we be more alive in Avodat Hashem, but I think we will find ourselves happier, because we'll always be on a learning curve, because we'll always be growing as human beings. And once we're growing, we're excited, we're alive, we are vibrant. And indeed, that way, we'll be better Jews, we'll be better community members, we'll be better family members, and our Avodat Hashem will be at a higher pedigree. So this is indeed what we have to do. And I think I've managed to keep somewhat to time. So I just want to wish everybody a Chanukah Sameach, and I hope I encapsulated a whole bunch of different vantage points. But I think maybe when I initially said, you know, being complacent, being calm is bad, that was a little surprising. And as I said myself, that Rashi always gave me trouble, but I think if we can interpret it in a slightly different way, we can see that it's quite a critical spiritual message for all of us.
Thank you so much, Rav Alex, for your inspiring words, to constantly push ourselves really to be growing. And the Chanukah lights behind us, that reminder. So thank you so much. And just to mention again that this year was L'Refuat Yechezkel Yehuda Ben-Yenta, for Charlie Simonoff, who was a member of State Court Shul. And so please, Bezrat Hashem, Bizchut the Shiur, he should have a refuah shlema. And thank you so much for the shuls that partnered with us for this beautiful shiur tonight. It was a huge honor. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to see everyone. Chanukah Sameach.
Sameach.